Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that what you wear has the power to change how you feel? Project Endure apparel is designed to remind you that easy won't make you stronger, and that growth is an uncomfortable choice that we all have the privilege to make every day. Look good, feel good, and perform good. Head to the link in the show notes to shop Project Endure apparel and keep on doing hard things. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 151. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and today we have a very, very, very special guest in New York, Andy Chen. Andy, what's up?
What's going on, dude? 151 is freaking impressive. Like, kudos on the consistency.
I appreciate that, man. I love this so much that I could see myself getting well into the thousands. And if I had more time on my hands, I would be pumping out more content. But here we are, episode 151. It's an honor to have you. And I figured we'd kick it off with a self-introduction. So how would you introduce yourself to the people listening who don't know who Andy Chen is?
Oh, man, this is always like the hardest question because you don't really know where to go. I just tend to not take myself too seriously. So my name is Andy. I always say I'm a kid from Queens, New York. I graduated from University at Buffalo, a little academics, Bachelor of Psychology. And then I graduated from the University of St. Augustine down in Miami, Florida. So I'm a physical therapist by trade. Married to my beautiful wife, Christy. Got an awesome puggo, Oliver, and love drinking wine, eating tacos, and hanging out, reading books. So that's a little bit about me.
That was so succinct. And, our mutual connection, I would say if we had to bring it back to the roots, is Zach Gabor, who was episode 27 of this podcast. It's where we first started our friendship. And we've both gone in different directions and yet similar directions since then in a lot of ways. And we'll get into that. But before we do, I'm curious what made you choose the career path of physical therapy?
No, for sure. One, shout out to Zach Gabor. Zach's just a super dope guy. And that whole crew that we kind of had coming up, it was like me, you, Taylor, Ravi, Nick Perugini. Just everyone's been kind of doing amazing. So super happy to be surrounded by that early in my career. But in terms of becoming a physical therapist, it's something that wasn't always kind of in the cards. I'll be completely honest. Along with like background about me, I've been in academic probation twice while in college. Didn't really know what the hell to do. I was just hustling sneakers. I bought and sold sneakers, and I've done that since I was about 10 years old. And I did that until I graduated physical therapy school. So I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life. And my oldest brother kept telling me, it's like, dude, you have to do something. Like, you're not going to be able to sell sneakers for the rest of your life. This isn't like something that's sustainable. At the time, it actually was pretty sustainable. But I got injured senior year of college, and I had it was ridiculous. We were at a trampoline park, and obviously that's not something you do every single day. So I'm doing these insane flips, landing super awkward. Next day, I had like lower back, upper back pain, and had symptoms going down both my arms, and I couldn't even bench anymore. And I know I didn't bench a ton in college. I was like repping 225, but I couldn't even like take the plate off and add 25 on each side. It was like brutal. So I went to go see a physical therapist, sports PT of New York in Buffalo, New York, and therapist was Allie. And when I started working with her, I didn't know what to expect, but she listened to me intently. She took my goals into consideration over time, as we're making progress with everything, strengthening exercise, nerve mobilizations. I was keeping consistent with stuff. I got to the point where I started training again, and I told Allie how happy I was. And I thought I was happy about it, but I felt like she was even happier. And I just remember looking at her like, wow, here's this person in front of me, really enjoying her work, so happy and passionate in what she does. And I just told myself, like, I need to know what that feels like. And that's when I decided to become a physical therapist.
Is it fair to say that how you thought things would play out in terms of the fulfillment and the meaning and the happiness has been true?
Oh, hell yeah. I tell everyone right now, it's like when someone asks me, like, what would you be if you weren't a physical therapist? It's really hard for me to conceptualize being in a different career because
Mm,
I love what I do. Like, if I could treat for the rest of my life, I would. Right. Like right now, I'm constrained a little bit because I have to also run the business. But I think what gets me into my flow state is treating, giving people like their life back.
mm.
And from a business side of stuff, the creative aspect, like creating things, building, branding, like those are the two things that I love. But yeah, I don't regret being a physical therapist at all.
Yeah. Well, one, you do an awesome job with the branding and the aesthetics of everything. So I just want to give you a compliment there because I noticed that. And then two, I think it's really interesting how this one person, Allie, essentially changed the trajectory of your life with how passionate and caring and thoughtful they were with how they interacted with you, which is just an interesting point.
There's, you know, it's one thing that I've been like tossing around with, religion and like higher beings and all these things just kind of happening. And it's good to think about that, right? It's like even something as simple as like saying yes to going to a trampoline park. I'm like, all right, let's do that, and you keep like going backwards, like, what if I didn't do that? What if I didn't do that? So just being where I'm at right now, I'm just super grateful for everyone I've met, everyone I've been able to interact with. Like, yeah, it's been amazing.
Well, and I think there's a bigger concept there, which is, we're always one experience, one decision, one person, one conversation away from a completely different life. And when you look at it that way, it's really exciting to think, hey, I could wake up tomorrow morning and I can have this interaction or do this thing or make this choice. And it can completely change the trajectory of the rest of my life, is both terrifying and exciting at the same time.
I went to a what exactly what you said, the theme of like what you just stated. I went to a public speaking course last year actually, and everyone there, super interesting people. I'm talking like FBI agents, like the higher up World Series, people that have been on teams that have won the World Series, someone that was a dentist that invented a technology that every dentist in the US is using, just like some really significant people. Everyone's like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a physical therapist. She's like, why are you here? I'm like, I just want to get better at communicating. And the theme of that week was everyone needs to have a big idea. And I was like, just like tossing around, like, what is my big idea? And for me, I'm like, my big idea is that everyone's a few aha moments away from living the life they want to live. And I want to provide that for people. So that's kind of like the background, obviously, with like the podcast that I run, it's called Aha Moment. And,
Mm.
we were talking a little bit about like what people want to get out of listening to the things that we're creating. And everything that I do, I think it kind of goes back to that. It's like, I just want to be able to provide people an aha moment, let them know that they're way more capable than they originally thought, and they can get to where they want to be.
Dude, that's beautiful. Okay, so a couple questions. One, would you say that your aha moment was that physical therapy experience at the end of undergrad, or did you have other aha moments as well?
I think that was whenever I think about that moment, I do get goosebumps because it made me realize that like I actually wanted to do something, right? Because at that point in time, um, you know, I always say like for the first 25 years of my life, and I'm 30 now, I was kind of on cruise control, just having fun, doing things, not a care in the world. And that's not necessarily a bad way to live. But when you're trying to find purpose, when you're trying to serve a higher meaning and, really figure out what you want to suffer for, that's when I realized I'm like, I can do this. Like, even though my grades were terrible, like, I'm willing to suffer for this. Like, I want to become a physical therapist.
Mm. That phrase, suffer for, finding what you're willing to suffer for. What is some of the suffering that comes along with the path that you've chosen?
Everyone's going to say student debt. Obviously, that's one of those things that come into play. Um, but one thing on that, it's like, I think there is unlimited leverage in the world, right? Like if you find something that you're extremely passionate about, you can have an obscene amount of leverage. I look at other physical therapists and they don't necessarily enjoy it as much as I do. Like when I'm reading on physical therapy, when I'm treating, working with clients, it's like play to me. And if I get to play every day, every hour, I'm gonna excel at it than someone that just thinks of it as work. So one part of the suffering, it's like I'm not saying these things are easy. I still wake up early to read, stay up to date on research, read books that are relevant, network with colleagues, and just maintain the skill set as much as I can. So it doesn't get easier, but you find meaning in the things that aren't easy. So that's one thing. It's the student debt, but I don't think about it too much because it's given me it's given me this like baseline that I wouldn't have gotten elsewhere, right? It gave me a foundation that I could build on. Because up until going to physical therapy school, I thought I was going to sell sneakers for the rest of my life, you know? So
Mm.
debt is one of those things that I think every physical therapist will take into consideration. But other things, it's just it's hard to say because I generally do think there's this innate suffering that happens no matter what. Like you can't avoid it. So you might as well do something that is meaningful for you. And like
Mm.
we're talking about these like aha moments. I never really enjoyed reading until I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So it's
Great
like
book.
go back to that, right? It's like you've got to find some meaning in the suffering. Like life is suffering, so you got to figure out what you're willing to suffer for. I'm not gonna know the exact quote, but I'm paraphrasing the things that he's saying, and I just go back to that. Like it's gonna be hard no matter what you do, right? Like I tell people all the time, 80% of people in a respective field don't belong in there. 15% just do enough to get by. 4% are pretty solid at what they do, and 1% is excellent. They
Mm.
completely change the trajectory of what people believe in, right? Like I want to be the 1%. When someone comes to
Mm.
me for physical therapy, I completely change their perspective on what physical therapy could be. When
Mm.
you're coaching someone on mindset, 80% of mindset coaches should not even be in the game.
Mhm.
15% can do enough, 4% you might recommend to friends. And that 1%, it's like, they name their kid after you. That's like what you're trying to get to.
Let's hope there are a lot of Joes and Andys in the years to come. That's how we'll know we're doing our job well. And I
That's
picked
the
up
most common name.
I picked up the Viktor Frankl quote. I have it here. He said, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." And it's such a powerful concept, and I agree with everything that you said. And to bring it back to a granular level, because I understand there are some people who will listen to this who don't have the bandwidth right now in this season of life to think big enough as to what do I want to suffer for? How can I find meaning on a grand scale? And it's that idea of like, today is going to be hard. I don't want to get out of bed or I want to snooze my alarm. I don't want to do this thing, right? It's going to be hard either way. And you're going to be tired at the end of the day either way. So you might as well get up a little earlier, do the thing you don't want to do, and at least feel proud and accomplished that you showed up the way you wanted to, because it's going to be hard either way, right?
Yeah, there's an infinite amount of, there's always going to be steps ahead of you. There's always going to be things that you could be doing better. But you just have to take like one simple action, right? Like when you mentioned like getting out of bed, I've been in that position. For it was probably my freshman year of college. I had a hard time getting out of bed. I just laid in bed watching Seinfeld and Friends all day because I had just experienced like my first anxiety attack while I was driving into BQE in New York City, and it was rough. But you just have to figure out like what is that one thing that you can do, right? What is one thing that you can kind of take control of again? Like for me at that time, it was just like I'm just gonna go outside. And even when I went outside, I would get freaking nervous. Like I would just be nervous being outside because I thought I would have another panic attack. It's this weird negative feedback loop. But it's like I'm just gonna go outside for a walk and I'll come back in. One day it's just a couple of minutes. Next day it's maybe 30 minutes. Next day it's gonna be an hour. But it's like if I keep avoiding the things that get me nervous, eventually everything's gonna get me nervous. If I keep avoiding the things that overwhelm me, I'm gonna eventually everything overwhelms me.
You shared a Mark Freeman quote with me in the intake form for the podcast. And so I'll read it because it applies. He said, If you avoid sweating, eventually everything makes you sweat. If you avoid anxiety, eventually everything makes you anxious. That is so spot on.
I wrote that quote in my like little journal I had last year at physical therapy school when I moved halfway across the country. I had did not know it at the time, but it was the drug capital of California. And it, you just me and my puggo, Oliver, and we go into this Airbnb that I booked for the 3 months I was supposed to be there, and it was trash by a druggie. And I was like, holy crap. So I have no one I know next to me. And I remember I was reading and I just saw that quote and talk about, aha moments. I'm like, we're gonna be all right. Like we're gonna figure this shit out.
Wow, that's powerful. If we go to the world of physical therapy for a minute before we really dive deep, you already touched on some concepts that are life concepts that I think also apply to rehabilitation. What are some life lessons that you've learned through the world of physical therapy from the human body through working with people in pain who are having trouble, limited in some way? What are some lessons that you've taken away from that?
I think the biggest thing it's like one, I I learned to like appreciate things a little bit more, right? And some of these things don't dawn on you until like you work with people that have suffered for like a really long time. I just remember one woman I was working with, we were rehabbing. She had like pain throughout her whole body. Everything was getting better, except her shoulder. And she was kind of just expressing her frustration about like she hasn't been able to golf because her surgeon had told her, like that this is not like you're not meant to golf. And then you're always gonna have shoulder pain, and eventually you're gonna have to get a surgery. And it was just a rough predicament that she was in. She was super busy, has a company, and does all these things. So like she couldn't like have the surgery and like still be able to do things because her job was actually demanding. And I remember her telling me like for about like 15 years, she just lived with it, like what that person said. And I'm like, 15 years. That's like having a kid and they just started high school, like for that long. Like up until the point that I went to high school, I lived a life that I didn't want to live because someone told me that like I wasn't capable of doing what I loved. And it's not like she wanted to, go pro. Like she just enjoyed it was therapeutic for her, right? And I just remember her crying to me, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks because, the most of the people that we see in a clinic, they're people that have been in chronic pain 5, 10, 15. I think the record for us is like 23 years. Uh, but we get used to these things. We get used to hearing people's stories. And I don't know what hit me that morning, but I took a step back and I was just like, fuck, I'm so sorry. And I'll never forget that because I just appreciate the little things, right? Like being able to do certain things with your body, just being able to run, look at the sun, feel your body move, like these little things that we take for granted. There's so many little moments in our everyday life that people don't get to experience because their body's been in pain for so long. So that's one thing I've gotten from being a physical therapist. Other things, there's so many lessons that you learn as you start to navigate conversations with people. One thing I really thought about more and more is like, there's so much common knowledge, right? Like, oh, treat people how you want to be treated. But I realized you should treat people how they also want to be treated, right? Like how I measure success isn't how they measure success. And there's these things that you have to realize that they're so meaningful to you, but they're not meaningful for the patient. So I classify these things like the secondary effects, right? Like the primary effect of what we do, improve strength, mobility, endurance, no one cares. But the secondary effects, right? You improve your strength so that, you can help your daughter move into college, right? You feel confident. You improve your mobility so that you can play with your grandchildren on the floor. Like those are the things that matter. So it's like, how do we measure success? We should measure success by the other person, these secondary effects. And how do we treat people? We should treat people how they want to be treated because we've only lived in this world where we're seeing it through our own eyes, seeing it through our own ecosystem. And we have to like take the other person's ecosystem into consideration.
Man, you have so much wisdom. I'm impressed. I'm just in awe because like those lessons are so simple the way you articulated them. And at the same time, they're so complicated and at times complex and hard to grasp and difficult to implement. And I just love that you shared it the way you did. And so thank you for that. And, I ask every guest on the podcast a series of questions, and we'll get into those. I'm not sure if you've already shared one of your answers, but we'll find out. But when you look back at your life so far, Andy, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
Oh man. I might get a little teary because there's a lot of stuff going on in my life currently,
Yeah.
personal stuff. But I'm always open to sharing stuff because it's one of those things where, for the longest time, like especially when I had anxiety, I felt like I was alone. So like when I shared these things and like I have people messaging me, even friends, like, "Oh man, I didn't know that you're going through this." Like I'm going through something similar.
Mm.
We just had Lunar New Year's pass, and I actually shared the reason why I got my tattoo on my right thigh recently. Um, I was obviously born in Manhattan, Queens kid forever, but born in Manhattan, and I was probably living in Manhattan, Lower East Side for 3 to 6 months before my parents realized that they couldn't really take care of me at the time, right? Like everyone in my family was working. So I say shipped back to China, but my mom, I believe it was my mom, took me back to China. I lived with my godparents for about 5 years. And I didn't come back until I was like pretty much ready to start pre-K. And at that time, I thought my godparents were my biological parents. So I had to, adjust to realizing like, okay, I have a new set of parents. And then I also realized that I have two older brothers that I was never aware of. So I came back. At that time, my parents moved to Queens, and I started, halfway across the world. Like, life completely changed. And when you're 5 years old, you have or 4.5, I don't know exactly. Like that's kind of hard to comprehend. But as I grew up, it's like I think I was so young that I didn't realize that like it really affected me. And it wasn't until like I really started my own business and started reflecting on like my mannerisms, my mind. It kind of starts with like, why am I scared to offer my services? Like, what's my mindset? What's my software that I need to update?
Mm.
I slowly started to realize I was like, wow, as a person, I am so afraid of people leaving my life, right? Because I had that experience earlier in my life. So I struggle with that. Like I always try to over deliver. I always try to make people feel welcome because at a point in my life, I felt like I wasn't enough and I felt like I wasn't welcome. So like I almost overcompensated that way. So I had a lot of forgiving to do. And one of that was forgiving my parents because I almost held on to a grudge. I was like, and it was so like subconscious. I was a rebellious kid growing up and I didn't learn to appreciate my parents until I got older. And I realized, it was hard for me, but it was hard for my parents. Like it's incredibly difficult to let your kid be in another continent, another country, and not see them as often, right? And that was when I got my tattoo. It's two koi fishes swimming upstream, and those reflect my parents navigating being immigrants and facing adversity. And then there's three lotuses, and they represent my brothers and I. And lotuses typically grow in suboptimal conditions like mud. And I was like, we turned out okay, despite the fact that my parents are just figuring it out. So that was probably, I didn't realize it at the time. It took me 28 years, but that's something that I realized like, wow, that had an impact on me.
Wow. So to work backward, what do the koi represent outside of your parents? Is there a significance with the koi, just like the lotus?
It's like the koi's for me, it's like it just represents like adversity, right? Like swimming upstream, and that's part of the reason why like I don't mind putting my head down and working, right? I look at my father, like look at my father and my uncle came to America first. They worked their asses off, sent money back to China, and eventually got everyone over here. And they came to a country, they didn't even speak the language. They figured it out. So my parents are just like navigating adversity, swimming upstream constantly. And I believe, don't quote me on it, koi fishes are known to be swimming upstream.
Mm.
Uh, the the fairy tale or the myth is like the koi fish swims upstream, and when it gets to the top, it turns into a dragon. Um, but yeah, that's kind of like my thought process. I was like, I didn't appreciate or acknowledge the fact that at that time my parents are also, in suboptimal conditions, and we're all just kind of figuring it out.
Mm. If you don't mind me asking, what was the aha moment or what led to the moment where you realized, oh, that was really hard for my parents as well?
Probably it's so hard. Like I'll tell you one thing. There's a book called Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus. Absolutely love the book. But if you read that book, you start to unpack a lot of things about yourself, right? For him, it's talking about like high performance, like certain people's mindsets when it comes to like training and pushing themselves, and how there's like unhealthy behaviors that stem from potentially, interactions they've had with coaches, adults. And as I'm reading that book, I'm like, holy crap, it's not coaches per se, but it's maybe my parents. It's maybe everyone that I've looked up to when I was younger. They've given me these rules to live by. Some of them are phenomenal, right? Like I do think, I have a solid work ethic from seeing my parents, my dad do his thing, my brothers do their thing. But some of it's like that doesn't serve me. Like that's not going to allow me to grow into the person that I want to become.
Mm,
So nowadays it's like whenever I'm doing something, whenever even like yeah, every little interaction, I just examine myself a little bit. I'm like, hey, like, why did I do that? Like, that wasn't
mm,
cool. Like, I didn't treat someone right. I could have done this better. Like, why was my reaction so quick? So I don't know exactly when it happened, but I would say after reading Steve Magnus Do Hard Things, I just started examining like all of my different mannerisms.
mm. Yeah, that's a great book, by the way. It's on my desk to my side here. And I'm gonna read a quote just because it's too perfect not to read about the lotus flower that I've incorporated into some of my writing over the years. And so the quote is from Goldie Hawn, and she said, "The lotus is the most beautiful flower whose petals open one by one, but it will only grow in the mud. In order to grow and gain wisdom, first you must have the mud, the obstacles of life and its suffering. The mud speaks of the common ground that humans share, no matter what our stations in life. Whether we have it all or we have nothing, we are all faced with the same obstacles: sadness, loss, illness, dying, and death. If we are to strive as human beings to gain more wisdom, more kindness, and more compassion, we must have the intention to grow as the lotus and open each petal one by one." Do you feel like you're better off for having had the life you've had?
Without a doubt. Um, you meet a lot of people throughout the years, and you're building relationships with people, and then everything is kind of like relative to what you've experienced, right? Like there's certain people like, they go to a coffee shop, and the barista's like, we're out of oat milk, and like their life is ruined. And I'm like, wow, like how hard was your life? Like, I'm sorry there's no oat milk, like life will go on. Whole milk is fine. So, in New York, you see a lot of these things where like people absolutely lose it for these things that are like seemingly small in nature. And you see people belittle others or maybe not pick others up. And I'm like, man, I'm just so sorry for like whatever you've experienced, right? But yeah, I do think that that's a beautiful quote. Like, I don't, everything happens for a reason. I'm grateful for the life I've had, and I'm grateful that like everyone tried their best with the resources that they have at that given time.
Yeah. I think that's also just an important piece to echo is that no matter who we're interacting with in life, the truth is everybody's doing the best with what they have. And, when people overreact or they don't treat others well or there's something going on, that's likely because there's something going on for that person behind the scenes under the surface. And I think it's hard, but I think that warrants us to take a look inside and say, can I be extra compassionate? Can I be extra patient? Can I be extra kind to that person? Because you never know what somebody's going through behind the scenes.
For sure. And I won't get into any politics, obviously, but I do recommend people reading like Maya Angelou's book, I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing, because you start to realize it's like everything that, we judge people on actions, but not everything that led up to these actions, right? All the context that surround these actions. And we just got to give people a break sometimes. And that's what I always remind myself. It's like there's a lot of things that have happened to or have had to happen to get to this point where this person has demonstrated some maybe extreme behaviors. It's like, wow, let's look at the history. Let's look at the context. Let's get both sides of the story. And I just feel like a lot of people in the world right now are so brash in their reactions and they don't reflect on like, how did it get to this point? Right.
I think that's such a great point, and I agree. And so, with that being said, Andy, that's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle. I also appreciate the fact that you were able to mention just the panic attacks and that season of anxiousness, because I think that's very relatable. Those are things that more or less happened to you. When you look back at your life this far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why did you choose to do that thing?
Oh man, that is tough. Um, as of recently, I just kind of like I always go back. It's hard to say because I always try to do something challenging, right? So there's nothing in one particular that comes to mind. There's just a lot of things that I've tried. For like a while, I was waking up 6 a.m. every day doing jujitsu, and my professor was like, why did you want to pursue jujitsu? And I was like, I just want to make sure that everything outside of these mats are a lot easier than what happens on the mats, right? Like if I wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning and I'm trying to fend off people trying to choke me out, everything else is gonna be pretty easy. I have had to take a break off jujitsu right now because life gets in the way, but I picked up running and I don't really run traditionally. I just run by commuting to work. So I just instead of taking a train, I just run to work. So I just keep subjecting myself to things that are slightly uncomfortable, slightly outside my comfort zone. And I just keep pushing. In jiu-jitsu, I did like a little mini tournament with another gym. That was tough as hell. Ran a half marathon after starting to pick up running for like 2 months in like November. I'm like, that was pretty tough. Building a business, tough. Putting yourself out there, seminars and speaking, especially when you froze before, tough. But I don't think if I had to describe it, it's less about like tough in one instance. It's tough to keep striving. It's tough to keep trying to be great at what you do. Like it's tough to be a physical therapist for 4 years and still want to learn. Like to me, that's tough because it's easy to just stop, right? It's tough to keep waking up every morning to be like, hey, how can I get better? So it's less of like one singular event, but like, how do I keep waking up every single day and just become a little bit better?
So I want to dissect the business side of things a little bit because I'm biased and I'm interested in that. However, I will share a quote that I've shared on previous episodes, and it's funny. Can't remember off the top of my head what episode number this is, but his name is Nick Mullery. He's also a physical therapist, and we talked about this concept of moving dirt. And it comes from this quote. It's a John Wellborn quote. And he said something to the effect of training and life are a lot like moving a big pile of dirt. Some days you have a shovel, some days you have a spoon, but as long as you're moving dirt, you're headed in the right direction. And that's what I picture when you said that. It's, whether you wake up with a spoon or a shovel, you're choosing to move dirt intentionally in the direction of becoming a better person. And it's not easy. And oftentimes it's not glamorous. And oftentimes it's not seen by the outside world. And that can be hard to continue on. But if you had to answer this, Andy, for you, what is the ultimate reason why? Why do you consistently pursue hard things?
I have to show myself that I'm capable, right, of changing, that I can be a better person,
Mm.
or I go back to like our mission statement. It's like, I want to create a better experience for physical therapists, right? I can easily make a decent amount of money working as a solopreneur, seeing clients on my own and building the business. But like, I absolutely hate knowing that like there's so many physical therapists that joined a profession. They can't find a job they love with good work-life balance. And they just get burnt out. They regret getting a degree. So like that's one, right? From like a work perspective. The other side of it, now from like a clinical perspective, when we're teaching, right? I hate the fact that like you get a physical therapy job and they tell you they're going to mentor you, and the only thing they bring up is like productivity. It's like, all right, can you help me solve this chronic back pain issue that this person is having? Right? Can you help me optimize my return to sports? Like, no, let's just keep talking about productivity. For the patients that walk through the door, I absolutely hate the fact that they've been mismanaged by physical therapists, by chiropractors, massage therapists, personal trainers, surgeons, physicians, whoever it is. There's not a single person that comes to our door that hasn't been with five other healthcare providers that have lacked transparency, that have made them feel broken. So, like, I want to create a space where they feel like they can heal. So everything to me, it has to extend beyond yourself, right? Like, there's personal goals that I have for myself, but I think if I focus on the other three, if I focus on creating a better space for physical therapists to work, a better space for patients to heal, and a community where physical therapists feel like they're being supported, right? Not just by me, but everyone else in there. And that's where I find meaning. That's where I think it's pretty awesome to wake up every morning.
Yeah, it's bigger than you, and that's part of what keeps you going, and it's very relatable. And so, speaking of the business, you know, uh, for me, and I'll just speak for myself, building a business has been incredibly challenging in a lot of different ways, and I think the biggest challenge has been managing the emotional volatility, the ups and the downs, the twists and the turns, the good days and the hard days, and like that emotional volatility piece of being an entrepreneur is challenging. So, one, I'm curious if you deal with that, and if you do, how. And then two, what other aspects of the business have been challenging for you?
There's a degree of it where it's like, I don't think it gets better until you realize that it's not everything,
Mm.
right? I'm working with a patient last year, and so actually, it was actually 2 years ago, and I'm working with this client, and, he shows up and he's like, "I gotta put my dog down." I'm like, "Oh, crap." Like, "I'm so sorry to hear that." He's like, "It was so sudden," and, he loves his dog, and his dog just developed cancer, and it was spreading, and his dog, you know, passes away. And like moments like that kind of stick with me, right? Because like the ups and the downs, all these things always happen, and then you see someone else have this crazy event, and you're like, business doesn't really matter, right? Like life matters. Like, did I tell my wife I love her? Did I kiss my dog? Did I enjoy this walk? Like, did I hold the door? Did I say hi to people? Was I nice to people? Am I spending my days the way I want to spend them? Like, the volatility, I think, gets better when you realize that like business is just one avenue of what you do, right? And the things that matter more are like who you are as a person, for the people around you, for your community. There's always going to be ups and downs, but what's your character like? Like, how are you going to show up every single day? And does it resonate with who you want to be? Like, I think that's how you deal with volatility.
I love that answer, and I couldn't agree more with all of that. And with that being said, I'll have you transition into what have been some of the challenging pieces of business for you. And I say this, or I ask this, because there are a lot of people listening to this podcast who either are business owners or want to become business owners. And that second group of people who want to become business owners are so terrified to start because it just feels so scary. And so if you could take us back to like, what was it like to start, and then what's been challenging since?
I feel like it wasn't too tough to start because I had my back against the wall, right? I was working for someone else, and I was doing everything. So it was pretty easy to start my own business because, while I was working for someone else, I was taking sales calls, I ran online classes, I did semi-private training, I was maintaining a caseload of 35 to 40 one-on-one patients, building relationships in the community, rebuilt the website twice, wrote blogs. So I was like, all right, I can do this thing because I've been doing it. So getting started was tough, but making that initial jump, because the first job I ever had was actually my dream job. It's a wonderful
Mm.
facility, great group of guys. Still keep in touch with them, and they've built the business even better now. After I don't want to say we had a falling out, but after I left, we had exit interview, and I kind of told them like some of the things that I thought could improve. So the getting started aspect wasn't necessarily tough, but I think it's because I prioritized the right things. I wasn't thinking about how can I get better at marketing. I was thinking about how can I get better at my craft. All I cared about was delivering a superior product. Because if you just get better at marketing, you could package shit, but it's still shit, right? Like, you're not going to have anyone that's going to actually want your service. But focusing on clinical development, being so damn good at what I do, that there was a line for people that wanted my service. Because once we launched, we had an inquiry within 15 minutes. And within 3 months, I filled out my schedule and Christie's schedule. And that's like rare. So getting started wasn't necessarily tough. I mean, I still remember trying to figure out the difference between like an LLC and PLLC, and I fell asleep. Like those are going to be tough, right? Like if you're an artist by trade and you have to learn the business side of it, like that's tough. But those are things that you can learn either by yourself. YouTube's amazing, or you hire a business coach. So in the early stages, there's a lot of shit to do, and you need a coach to help you figure out what to do. As you start to navigate business, we kind of talked about it, but it consumes you, right? Like there's no days off. And I don't say this to be a hardo, but I'm always thinking about business. And it's also tough when your business partner is also your wife. So like, sometimes we go out to dinner and we don't have any arbitrary rules of like, oh, we only talk business for 15 minutes and then, we don't talk about business anymore. I kind of cringe at those things because I just want things to happen naturally. And I feel like when we force things, it ends up being worse.
Mm.
But I think setting aside time to make sure that like you're still doing life. Like, like you're still spending time with your parents. Like the first 2 years building my, practice and everything, like I barely saw my parents. Um, One thing I did well was like, eventually Christy and I, every single Friday, we go out to eat. Saturday, we go on another date. And then Sunday, we take Oliver for like a really long walk. So, like, putting time in your schedule to do things that are meaningful, right? That's not something that I did all the time. Like, it wasn't until like, I'll tell you straight up, I'm biking into work 4 a.m. in the morning, cross a bridge because I'm seeing a client and I'm just screaming, like, fuck this. Like, this is not worth it, right? I was burnt out. And I was just like, I don't know what the fuck to do anymore, right? Because I'm exhausted. I don't have any time. I don't have anything. I have control of nothing. And I just got back to like, all right, what's 3 daily habits? What's 3 weekly habits? And what's 3 monthly habits that I know if I follow, things will be okay. Daily habits, like giving myself white space, time to think. Weekly habits, I gotta, be home for dinner 1 day a week. I gotta take Christy out to a date. I gotta walk Oliver and enjoy it. Once a month, I take Oliver for like an adventure. Like we go somewhere that is a little bit out of the ordinary, right? Instead of walking around our neighborhood, like let's drive somewhere. Let's do something dope.
Mm.
But that is the toughest part. Like business will consume you, and you have to figure out ways to still enjoy life when things are not going well. Right. And you also have to figure out how to be humble when things are going well. Right. Because that's what happens. It's like things are going well. And now you start swagging yourself out, you start doing all these things. And then when things are going down, it's like, you're like, I spent that money.
Whoops.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
like business consumes you.
Well, I think one of the questions, and I forget where I heard this, but how do you go all in on something without being all consumed? It's a tough question. And I think that's something that most business owners will navigate for a long time, if not forever, as businesses grow and ebb and flow. And the other thing I'll throw out there that you made me think of is a question from Tim Ferriss. And he poses this question: are you hunting field mice or are you hunting antelope? And the idea is, if you're a lion and you're out in the safari, wherever you are, is it worth your time, your energy, your effort to go catch a mouse? Because the calories you get from that mouse probably aren't going to be worth the calories you spent to catch it. And so instead of catching all these field mice, why don't you just focus on what the antelope is? And I think a lot of what you said made me think of that, because it's priorities, right? What are the most important things? How do I make time for those things? And then let the other things either fall into place or delegate them or just let them go.
I agree. There, and I go back, like, I can talk business all day, right? Like, there's so many great things that I've learned. But it kind of goes back to like when you start a business, you start from square one, right? No one comes out of school like knowing how to copyright, how to craft emails, how to create these beautiful lead magnets so like people will want to give you their emails, how to take a discovery call, how to do public speaking because you're probably doing workshops as well. So it's like you have to be a student of the game again. It's something that you're not absolutely used to at all. And that's the hardest part. And, when you were asking me, like, why do I do hard things? It's like, I do hard things so I can show myself that I'm still capable of doing hard things, stepping outside my comfort zone. You know, I tell you right now, like, every single time we host a seminar, I wake up at 4 a.m. because I can't sleep because I'm too excited, and I update the slides. Like I'm like, I think this is terrible. I'm not sure how it's going to be received. Like I always have this like antsiness, and then people will come up to me after a seminar. It's like, this is the most electrifying seminar I've ever been a part of. One person's like, I've attended 70 Con Ed weekends. This is the best Con Ed weekend I've ever had. So it's like, it's crazy to get that feedback when I'm like, oh man, I kind of suck, you know? But it's this
Ah,
constant like trying to prepare, trying to be better. You're not gonna make it in business if you're not constantly getting better yourself. One of the biggest reasons why businesses are stagnant is because the person running the business is stagnant.
that is so spot on. So I think you touched on this, and we've got two more questions. And so I'll ask this one that I think you already hinted at. What does the word endurance mean to you? What comes to mind when you hear that word?
Oh man, right now zone two because I'm a lot into my running. It's been my new thing. But when I think of endurance, I I just think about just one step at a time, like one step at a time. And I hinted at like when I had anxiety, and you kind of talked about like what's the hardest thing you ever had to do. Some of the hardest things I ever had to do was just get out of bed that morning, put some clothes on, go to class, try my best to pay attention because I had just failed art history again because I just haven't shown up to class, right? Like I had a long period of my life where I had terrible habits. I set myself up for failure. And all of those things compounded my freshman year of college to the point that like I felt like I was crippled by anxiety. So some of the hardest things I've ever had to do was just get out of bed. Like those are the things that like people don't understand until you've done it, that it's like really, really tough. But yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, hard is so relative. And I've got a quote from Veronica Roth that I'll read. She said, "There are so many ways to be brave in this world. Sometimes bravery involves laying down your life for something bigger than yourself or for someone else. Sometimes it involves giving up everything you've ever known or everyone you've ever loved for the sake of something greater. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is nothing more than gritting your teeth through pain and the work of every day, a slow walk toward a better life. That is the sort of bravery I must have now." And that image of not wanting to get up out of bed, not wanting to do this thing that maybe you failed or didn't do well at, and just get up and do it and go one foot in front of the other. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. It's not even exciting. But it has to be done. And that can be one of the hardest things that we'll ever have to do, even though it sounds so small.
And I think that's what endurance is, right? It's having a shovel one day and having a spoon another day. Like, can you still do it even though you've got a spoon?
Mm,
Still get some work done. It might not be as much as you want, but when people, I can't even imagine like people with kids. It's like their bucket is emptied before they actually get to pursue anything. You know,
mm.
there's so many things they have to manage. They have a spoon every single day, but can you keep doing something with a spoon every single day? Can you keep picking up dirt? Endurance to me is just when everything is stacked against you, when you have nothing going your way, can you still take one step forward? And if you can't consistently do that, you're going to be okay.
Mm. With that being said, Andy, there are people listening to this podcast who are going through all different sorts of things. Some of them are having trouble getting out of bed. Some of them are performing at an incredibly high level and just want to get a little bit better, move the dirt, even when they have a spoon. But no matter what, everybody's going through something. And so right now, you have a chance to speak whatever encouragement, whatever guidance, whatever wisdom you have for someone going through a tough season of life. What would you say to that person?
It's so cliche, but it's one thing that I've been thinking about more. I've been listening. I go through phases of listening to like country music, love songs, rap music, everything, every kind of genre there is. But I've been getting back into like a lot of the rappers from Queens, and just kind of listening to people that have endured stuff, built, enterprises, huge businesses. And I find that the people that do really, really well and don't lose themselves in the process don't forget where they come from.
Mm,
So one thing I've been telling myself more is when the highs are high, don't forget about how low you were at times. Don't forget that other people were low too, and that eventually you'll be at a point where you can pick those people up. Like, don't forget how far you came and all the people that helped you get there. And now when you're low, don't forget about everything that you've done up until this point that was extremely challenging, right? Like, you're a baby, you learn how to walk even though you fell so many freaking times. You learn math, you learn English, you went to school, you learn how to tie your shoes. There's so many things in life that you've done in the past. You just need proof that you can change. And I just keep going to that, right? Like, I can change. I can be a better public speaker. I could be a better husband. I could be a better friend. You can always be better. You've done this before hundreds of times. If you need someone to show you and prove to you that you have positively changed before in the past, just shoot me a DM and I'll remind you, right? There's so many things you've done as a kid where you failed constantly and you still did it. So don't forget who you are when the lows are low, right? Because you're going to be able to get yourself out of this. There's people out there that have been in your shoes and sometimes even in worse shoes, and they've been able to get out there. People less smart than you, right? People less fortunate than you, people in the worst circumstances. And the only thing that they did was keep going. So there's no choice. Don't be too high on the highs and don't be too low on the lows. Everything is going to work itself out as long as you keep going.
I don't often listen back to podcasts that I record for a number of reasons, but I think this is one I'm going to listen back to a few times, especially the last 2 minutes. And I mean that. And so, Andy, I appreciate you a ton. And I know people listening appreciated this. And so, where's the best place for those people to find you, connect with you, or follow along with what you have going on?
Yeah, easiest way to kind of find me is going to be at Dr. Andy Chen. If any of this stuff resonated with you and you need help with something, I'm always game, right? Like, don't be afraid to reach out. I try my best to respond to DMs within like 2 to 3 days. And if I can give you a little bit of my time, just recording a voice message for 30 to 60 seconds, and it gives you a ton of positivity, brings a little bit of spark to your life, brings a little bit of happiness, like, I'm more willing to do that because it all kind of comes forward. I'm doing this for whoever now, and eventually you'll do it for somebody else. So just keep paying it forward, and I'm willing to pay it forward. Just reach out if you need anything.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage anyone listening who feels like they might want to reach out to Andy to reach out to Andy. And man, thank you for this conversation, for sharing your story, and just for sharing your light and energy with the world here and through everything that you do. I'm so excited for the way that life's unfolding for you. And I really appreciate this.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much, Joe, for having me on.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.